If Ukraine had nukes, would Putin still have attacked it? The best part is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine gave Russia their nuclear weapons in exchange for Russia agreeing to never attack Ukraine. Edited for clarity. No country with nuclear arms has ever been invaded and occupied over a large part of its territory, or faced an existential threat to its existence by conventional military means from another state. Some have faced limited invasions of colonies or contested border regions and met these with conventional force without resorting to nuclear arms. The possible exception is Israel during the Yom Kippur War, but Israel is intentionally ambiguous about whether or not it has nuclear weapons, and if the Samson option is to be believed, holds them in reserve as a final weapon if conventional arms have failed. So, deterrence works differently for them, though it remains the case that the destruction of the State of Israel by force of arms is extremely unlikely, in part because they have the nuclear option. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons with guarantees from the Western powers and Russia that they'd all defend Ukrainian sovereignty and never allow it to be invaded by Russia. 3 decades ago, the newly independent country of Ukraine was briefly the third largest nuclear power in the world. Thousands of nuclear arms had been left on Ukrainian soil by Moscow after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, but in the years that followed, Ukraine made the decision to completely denuclearize. In exchange, the US, the UK and Russia would guarantee Ukraine's security in a 1994 agreement known as the Budapest Memorandum. If Russia didn't have nukes, NATO soldiers would be sipping coffee in Moscow for the last 18 months. Ukraine never had the capability to use those nukes. Sure, Ukraine had the physical nukes, but no capability to launch. The codes were in Moscow, and Moscow would never give those up. Ukraine would have had to place the warheads in new missiles and create new launch platforms. When Ukraine became a state, their focus was not completely collapsing and making sure their citizens were fed. Spending hundreds of millions of dollars building ICBMs or regular ballistic missiles wasn't feasible. No country with a tiny handful of nuclear warheads can actually use them. They are entirely for bluff and bluster. If Ukraine had 56 warheads and used one on Russia, they know perfectly well what would happen. Putin would use a couple dozen of his 6,000 nukes and turn Ukraine into a glass parking lot. And the same is true for North Korea, Iran, or anyone else who doesn't have at least several hundred. Yeah, Ukraine had no way of maintaining or using what it had. Those were never Ukrainian nukes. They were Soviet nukes that passed on to Russia, and Russia retained operational control over them. Ukraine never had means to activate them. Ukraine also never had means to maintain them if they had had them. If Ukraine decides to forcefully seize actual nuclear weapons, Russia will invade to the cheering, if not actual assistance, of NATO. If Ukraine had nukes, the US would want to remove the nukes before starting the Orange Revolution, etc. A country in civil unrest increases the chance they sell nukes to Arabs. The last thing US wants to see. To compare, the US left North Korea alone and decimated Muammar Gaddafi, depending on the nuke availability. They should make a couple. They have the material and know-how. Of course not. When Bush invaded Iraq, he set the current world order. The only way for a country to protect its sovereignty is to have nukes. Put it to this way, Russia would not exist as it is today if it didn't have nukes.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.